On the day she signed her divorce papers, Rachel Carter watched her mother-in-law order the family lawyer to search her purse right there in the conference room. The accusation was theft, heirloom silverware, supposedly hidden in her bag. The entire Whitmore family stared at her with contempt, whispering that a poor black woman had never deserved to enter their bloodline. Her husband signed his name without hesitation, without a single word in her defense. No one in that room knew the truth. The company keeping their empire alive belonged to her. And when the truth surfaced, who would be left with nothing? Rachel Carter had built an empire in silence. At 32 years old, she was the founder and CEO of Meridian Capital, a technology and financial investment conglomerate valued at tens of billions of dollars. Yet her name appeared nowhere. No magazine covers, no Forbes interviews, no photographs at industry galas. The company operated under an anonymous board of directors, and the true identity of its leader was known to exactly 3 people on Earth: her personal attorney, her chief financial officer, and herself. This was not an accident. This was survival. Rachel had grown up in the roughest neighborhoods of Baltimore, in a 2-bedroom apartment where the heat stopped working every winter and the roaches never stopped coming. Her father died when she was 7, a heart attack on a construction site. No insurance, no savings, nothing left behind but a second-hand Bible and 3 months of unpaid rent. Her mother, Gloria Carter, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table: cleaning offices before dawn, waitressing through the afternoon, folding laundry at a hotel until midnight. Gloria never complained. She just worked, and she made Rachel promise one thing: get out. Rachel got out. She earned a full scholarship to MIT, where she started building her first software company in a cramped Boston apartment while surviving on instant noodles and 4 hours of sleep. She graduated early at 19, her brilliance undeniable, even to professors twice her age. Before her 20th birthday, she sold that company for $800 million. By 21, she had founded Meridian Capital and begun transforming it into a financial powerhouse that quietly controlled stakes in dozens of major corporations across America. But success had taught her something ugly about human nature. The moment people learned she had money, everything changed. Men who had ignored her suddenly appeared with flowers and compliments. Old classmates who had mocked her accent now wanted to reconnect. Business partners smiled to her face while calculating her net worth behind her back. Everyone wanted something. No one wanted her. The worst was a man named Derek. Handsome, charming, perfect. He had pursued her for months, made her believe she was special, made her believe he saw the real her. 3 weeks after she told him about Meridian Capital, she found him in bed with another woman. When she confronted him, he laughed. "You really thought I was with you for your personality?" he had said. "Baby, I was with you for the portfolio." That night, Rachel made a decision that would shape the next decade of her life. She would disappear. Not physically, but financially. She restructured Meridian Capital so that her ownership was buried under layers of holding companies and trusts. She stopped attending public events. She created a persona for herself, a freelance financial consultant, someone who worked remotely, made decent money, lived simply. She moved out of her penthouse and into a modest apartment in Brooklyn. She traded her designer clothes for thrift store finds. She drove a 10-year-old Honda instead of the Mercedes, sitting unused in a private garage. And she made herself a promise. If anyone ever loved her again, they would love her with nothing. They would love the woman, not the wallet. That was the woman Ethan Whitmore met in a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Ethan Whitmore was everything Rachel had told herself to avoid. He was 34 years old, the only son of Richard and Margaret Whitmore, heirs to a real estate and financial empire that had dominated East Coast high society for 3 generations. He had attended the finest prep schools, graduated from Yale, and stepped into an executive position at Whitmore Holdings before his 25th birthday. His face had appeared in society magazines since childhood. His name opened every door in Manhattan. But on that rainy Tuesday, Ethan was not thinking about doors or dynasties. He was thinking about escape. He had just walked out of a charity gala his mother had organized. Another suffocating evening of handshakes with people who measured human worth in stock portfolios and bloodlines. He had smiled until his face hurt. He had nodded at conversations about yacht purchases and vineyard acquisitions. And when he finally could not take another second, he had slipped out a side door and walked 6 blocks in the rain until he found a coffee shop that looked nothing like the world he came from. That was where he saw her. A black woman sitting alone by the window, reading a book on macroeconomic theory, scribbling notes in the margins with intense concentration. She wore no makeup. Her clothes were simple, a worn sweater, faded jeans. She did not look up when he entered. She did not seem to notice or care that anyone else existed. Ethan was captivated. He ordered a coffee he did not want just to have an excuse to stay. He sat at a nearby table, pretending to check his phone, stealing glances at her. Finally, after 20 minutes of failed courage, he walked over. "That book," he said, nodding at her copy of Monetary Policy Analysis. "Is it any good?" Rachel looked up. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, unimpressed. "It is if you actually understand economics," she said. "Most people who ask about it are just looking for a conversation starter." Ethan laughed, a real laugh, not the polished chuckle he deployed at galas. "Guilty as charged." She almost smiled. Almost. They talked for 3 hours. Rachel was brilliant, funny, brutally honest. She challenged every opinion he offered. She did not care about his family name. In fact, when he mentioned Whitmore Holdings, she shrugged and said she had never heard of it. Whether that was true or a deliberate deflection, Ethan never knew. But in that moment, he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt seen, not as an heir, not as a portfolio, just as a man. They dated for 14 months before Ethan proposed. During that time, Rachel maintained her cover flawlessly. She told him she worked as an independent financial consultant, a job vague enough to explain her flexible schedule and comfortable income without raising suspicion. When she occasionally had to travel for what she called client meetings, actually board meetings for Meridian Capital, Ethan never questioned it. He was too busy falling in love. And he did fall in love. Genuinely. Completely. He loved that Rachel did not need his money. He loved that she challenged him intellectually. He loved that she came from nothing and had built herself into something, even if he did not know the true scale of what she had built. He loved that she made him feel like more than his last name. When he proposed, it was with a simple ring, not the family heirloom his mother had demanded he use, but a modest diamond he had chosen himself. "I picked this because it reminded me of you," he told her, kneeling in the same coffee shop where they had met. Simple, beautiful, real. Rachel said yes, and for one perfect moment she believed she had finally found what she had been searching for, someone who loved her for exactly who she was. She did not know that moment would be the last purely happy memory she would ever have with Ethan Whitmore. The Whitmore family made their disapproval clear from the beginning. Margaret Whitmore, Ethan's mother, was a woman who had spent 60 years believing that bloodline determined worth. She looked at Rachel and saw an intruder, a poor black woman who had somehow bewitched her son into abandoning his proper place in society. She smiled politely at the wedding, but her eyes were ice. Richard Whitmore, Ethan's father, was more direct. At the rehearsal dinner, he had pulled Ethan aside and said words that would echo through their marriage. "This is a mistake," Richard had warned. "She is not one of us. She will never be one of us. And when this falls apart, do not expect the family to clean up your mess." Charlotte Whitmore, Ethan's younger sister, did not even pretend to approve. At the wedding reception, she had approached Rachel with a champagne glass in hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Welcome to the family," Charlotte had said. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Rachel had smiled back, calm and steady. "I intend to," she replied. But inside, she felt the first cold whisper of doubt. She had married Ethan because she loved him. She had believed he would protect her from his family's cruelty. She did not yet know how wrong she was. The first year of their marriage was everything Rachel had dreamed it could be. Ethan defended her against his family's subtle cruelties. When Margaret made pointed comments about Rachel's background at dinner parties, Ethan would steer the conversation elsewhere. When Richard questioned whether Rachel was contributing anything to the family, Ethan reminded his father that love was not a business transaction. When Charlotte whispered insults just loud enough to be heard, Ethan told his sister to keep her opinions to herself. Rachel believed she had chosen right. She believed Ethan was different. But belief has an expiration date. The second year brought cracks. Small ones at first, barely visible, easy to ignore. Ethan started working longer hours, attending more family functions without her. He stopped defending her at dinners, choosing silence instead. When Margaret criticized Rachel's cooking, Ethan said nothing. When Richard made a joke about welfare queens, Ethan looked away. By the third year, the cracks had become chasms. Rachel noticed the changes in Ethan's behavior. The late nights he claimed were business meetings, the phone calls he took in other rooms, the way he flinched when she touched him unexpectedly. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself the pressure from his family was temporary. She told herself that the man who had knelt in a coffee shop with a simple ring was still in there somewhere. She was wrong. On a cold morning in November, Ethan sat across from her at their kitchen table and spoke the words that shattered 3 years of hope. "I want a divorce." His voice was flat, rehearsed, empty of the warmth she once knew. He explained that their marriage no longer fit the family's image. He explained that he had made a mistake. He explained that it was time for both of them to move on. He did not explain the real reason. He did not need to. Rachel already knew. She had seen the photograph 2 weeks earlier, Ethan at a charity gala, his hand on the waist of a blonde woman in a red dress, their bodies too close for business, their smiles too intimate for friendship. The woman's name was Victoria Ashford, daughter of one of Whitmore Holdings' largest partners. She was everything the Whitmore family wanted: white, wealthy, connected, controllable. Rachel did not confront Ethan about the photograph. She simply waited. And now, watching him ask for a divorce with the same casual tone he might use to order coffee, she understood the full scope of her mistake. She had given him her heart believing he would protect it. He had crushed it without a second thought. The divorce proceeding was designed to humiliate her. The Whitmore family arrived in force. Richard, Margaret, Charlotte, and a team of lawyers whose hourly rates probably exceeded what Rachel's mother had earned in a year. They gathered in a conference room on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan law firm, surrounded by mahogany furniture and oil paintings of dead white men who had once owned everything they surveyed. Rachel arrived alone. The family's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Jonathan Price, slid a document across the table before she had even sat down. "This is a standard dissolution agreement," he said, his tone suggesting that Rachel was too simple to understand the words. "It stipulates that you will make no claims against any Whitmore family assets, properties, or financial holdings. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from discussing any family matters publicly, and you will vacate the residence within 30 days. Rachel looked at the document. She looked at the faces around the table. Margaret's satisfied smile, Richard's dismissive glance, Charlotte's barely concealed sneer. Then Margaret spoke. "Before we proceed, I want her bag searched." The room went silent. Even the lawyers seemed surprised. Margaret's voice was ice. "Several pieces of heirloom silver have gone missing from the estate. Given the circumstances, I think it is reasonable to ensure nothing leaves this room that does not belong to her." Rachel felt the words like a physical blow. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of enduring their contempt while maintaining her dignity, and this was how it ended. Being accused of theft in a room full of people who had never seen her as human. She looked at Ethan. He was staring at the table, his jaw tight. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, or the ghost of the man he used to be. But he did not speak. He did not defend her. He simply sat there while his mother's lawyer approached Rachel and asked her to open her purse. She opened it. They found nothing but a wallet, keys, and a tube of lipstick. Margaret did not apologize. She simply nodded, as if the violation had been perfectly reasonable. The signing took less than 10 minutes. Ethan wrote his name without hesitation, without looking at her, without acknowledging that he was ending something that had once meant everything to him. When it was done, Rachel stood. She looked at each of them. The family that had spent 3 years making her feel worthless, the husband who had abandoned her without a fight, the lawyers who had treated her like a problem to be disposed of. "I hope you remember this day," she said quietly. Then she walked out. That night, alone in the apartment that no longer felt like home, Rachel allowed herself to break. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, and she cried. Not the polite tears of disappointment, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who had gambled everything on love and lost. She cried for the woman who had believed in fairy tales. She cried for the mother who had worked 3 jobs so her daughter could have a better life. She cried for every moment she had spent pretending to be less than she was, hoping it would make her worthy of being loved. In the darkness, memories surfaced unbidden. She remembered the night Ethan proposed, how he had trembled slightly as he knelt, how his voice had cracked when he said he wanted to spend his life with her. She remembered their first dance at the wedding, when he had whispered in her ear that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She remembered the early mornings when he would bring her coffee in bed and kiss her forehead before leaving for work. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. A different woman, a different man, a different life. She pulled the wedding ring from her finger, the simple diamond Ethan had chosen because it reminded him of her, and held it in her palm. 3 years of her life, reduced to a piece of metal and stone that no longer meant anything. She placed the ring on the floor beside her and did not pick it up again. The discovery happened by accident. 2 weeks after the divorce, Rachel forced herself back to work. She had neglected Meridian Capital during the final months of her marriage, delegating everything to her trusted CFO while she tried to salvage a relationship that was already dead. Now, sitting in her private office on the top floor of a building no one knew she owned, she began reviewing the quarterly reports she had ignored for too long. It was in the 3rd report, a summary of strategic investments and partnership holdings, that she saw the name. Whitmore Holdings. Rachel stared at the page, certain she had misread. She pulled up the full file on her computer and scrolled through 5 years of financial records. The truth was undeniable. Meridian Capital had been providing investment capital, credit lines, and strategic financial support to Whitmore Holdings for half a decade. The Whitmore family's real estate empire, their luxury developments, their entire financial structure, all of it was propped up by money that flowed from a company they did not know belonged to the black woman they had just thrown away like garbage. She called her CFO, Marcus Webb, a man who had been with her since the beginning. "Whitmore Holdings," she said. "Why was I never briefed on this account?" Marcus sounded confused. "It is one of our mid-tier investments, nothing remarkable. They have been steady but not significant enough to bring to your attention directly. Is there a problem?" Rachel closed her eyes. "No, no problem. Send me everything you have on their financial position, every detail." The files arrived within the hour. What Rachel found made her sick. Whitmore Holdings was drowning in debt. Years of mismanagement, overexpansion, and Richard Whitmore's stubborn refusal to modernize had left the company bleeding money. The only thing keeping them afloat was the steady stream of capital from Meridian, capital that Rachel's team had approved without ever knowing they were funding the family that treated their boss as less than human. The irony was so bitter, she almost laughed. The Whitmores had spent 3 years looking down on her, calling her a gold digger, accusing her of marrying Ethan for money, and the entire time they had been surviving on her money without knowing it. Every champagne toast at their galas, every designer gown Margaret wore to charity events, every luxury car in their garage, all of it had been subsidized by the woman they believed was worthless. The second revelation came 3 days later. Rachel had hired a private investigator, not out of revenge, but out of a need to understand. She wanted to know how long Ethan had been lying. She wanted to know when the man she loved had become the stranger who signed away their marriage without a word. The investigator's report was thorough. Too thorough. Ethan's affair with Victoria Ashford had begun 18 months earlier. Not weeks before the divorce, but more than a year into their marriage. The relationship had been carefully hidden at first, conducted in hotels outside the city, disguised as business trips. But as time passed, Ethan had grown careless. Or perhaps he simply stopped caring. But that was not the worst of it. The report also revealed that the Whitmore family had hired their own investigators 6 months before the divorce. They had been digging into Rachel's background, searching for evidence that she was a fraud, a criminal, a con artist, anything that would justify their hatred and give them grounds to force Ethan to leave her. They had found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Rachel Carter had built her empire legally, ethically, through intelligence and relentless work. But the absence of evidence had not changed their conclusion. They had simply decided to remove her anyway. The truth crystallized in Rachel's mind with painful clarity. The Whitmores had never needed proof that she was unworthy. They had decided she was unworthy the moment they saw the color of her skin. Everything else, the investigations, the accusations, the humiliation in the conference room, had been theater designed to justify a verdict they had reached before she ever spoke a word. They did not want the truth. They only wanted permission to destroy her, and now Rachel held the power to destroy them instead. The power to destroy someone is not the same as the will to do it. Rachel spent 3 weeks staring at the files on her desk, knowing she could end the Whitmore family with a single phone call. She could withdraw Meridian's funding, trigger the default clauses in their loan agreements, and watch their empire crumble into dust. It would be easy. It would be justified. It would be exactly what they deserved. And yet, she could not bring herself to make the call. Late one night, alone in her office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Rachel confronted the question she had been avoiding since the day she discovered the truth. If she destroyed them, what would that make her? She thought about her mother, Gloria Carter, who had worked herself to exhaustion so her daughter could have a future. Gloria had never been bitter about her circumstances. She had never sought revenge against the landlords who raised the rent or the employers who paid her less than she deserved. She had simply kept moving forward, kept building, kept believing that hard work and dignity would eventually prevail. Before she died, Gloria had given Rachel one piece of advice that had stayed with her through every triumph and every heartbreak. Baby girl, do not ever let the pain they cause you turn you into someone you would not recognize. The world will hurt you. People will betray you. But your character belongs to you, and no one can take it unless you hand it over. Rachel stood at the window, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights, and asked herself whether revenge would require her to hand over everything she had fought to become. The answer did not come easily. Part of her wanted the Whitmores to suffer. Part of her wanted Ethan to wake up every morning knowing he had thrown away the only person who ever loved him for himself. Part of her wanted Margaret to feel the humiliation of poverty the way Rachel had felt the humiliation of that conference room. But another part, the part that still remembered the girl from Baltimore who had promised herself she would never become cruel, hesitated. Destroying them would not undo the damage. It would not erase the memory of her purse being searched like a criminal's. It would not restore the 3 years she had spent loving a man who lacked the courage to love her back. Revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it would not heal anything. Rachel made her decision. She would not destroy the Whitmores. She would simply stop saving them. She would withdraw her support and let gravity do the rest. If they fell, it would be because of their own choices, their own failures, their own arrogance. She would not push them off the cliff, but she would not catch them either. That was not revenge. That was justice. The Whitmore empire began to collapse on a Tuesday morning in March. Richard Whitmore had spent decades building relationships with bankers who looked the other way when quarterly reports disappointed. He had cultivated friendships with investors who trusted the Whitmore name more than they trusted financial statements. He had assumed that reputation would always be enough. He was wrong. When Meridian Capital quietly began reducing its exposure to Whitmore Holdings, nothing dramatic, just a gradual tightening of credit lines and a reluctance to approve new funding requests, the other dominoes started falling. Banks that had been patient suddenly demanded repayment. Partners who had been flexible suddenly insisted on renegotiating terms. The financial world operated on confidence, and when confidence wavered, everything wavered with it. Within 6 weeks, Whitmore Holdings was hemorrhaging money faster than Richard could find new sources. The company's stock price dropped by 40%. 3 major development projects stalled when contractors refused to work without guaranteed payment. The business press, which had long treated the Whitmores as untouchable aristocrats, began publishing articles about the family's questionable accounting practices and over-leveraged investments. Richard called every contact he had. He begged for meetings with investors who had once competed for his attention. He promised reforms, restructuring, anything to stop the bleeding. But money has no loyalty, and the people who had once been eager to associate with the Whitmore name now wanted nothing to do with a sinking ship. In desperation, Richard's advisors suggested one final option: approach Meridian Capital directly. The mysterious investment firm had been their most reliable supporter for years. If anyone could save them, it would be whoever controlled that company. Richard agreed. He did not know that he was about to walk into a meeting with the woman his family had humiliated just months before. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in the Meridian Capital boardroom. Rachel had considered refusing. She had considered sending her lawyers to deliver the news that Meridian would not be extending any further support. She had considered never revealing herself at all, letting the Whitmores collapse without ever knowing who had pulled the foundation out from under them. But something inside her needed them to see, not for revenge, but for truth. They had spent 3 years looking at her and seeing nothing. They deserved to finally understand exactly what they had missed. The Whitmore family arrived together, Richard in his custom suit, Margaret in her designer dress, Charlotte with her perpetual expression of disdain, and Ethan, pale, tired, visibly stressed in a way Rachel had never seen during their marriage. They brought lawyers and financial advisors, an army of professionals assembled to negotiate the salvation of everything they had built. They were escorted to the executive floor and shown into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Coffee was offered, documents were arranged, everyone settled into their seats, waiting for the meeting to begin. When the door opened again, the room fell silent. Rachel walked in wearing a black suit that cost more than the car she had driven during her marriage. Her hair was pulled back, her posture was perfect, and her expression revealed nothing. She moved to the head of the table with the confidence of someone who had commanded rooms like this for over a decade. Margaret was the first to react. Her face drained of color as recognition slowly transformed into disbelief. "What is this?" Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Rachel sat down and folded her hands on the table. "I work here," she said. "Actually, that is not quite accurate. I own here. Meridian Capital is my company. I founded it 11 years ago, and I have been running it ever since." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Charlotte's sneer had frozen on her face, replaced by something that might have been fear. The lawyers looked at each other, clearly trying to calculate what this revelation meant for their clients. And Ethan looked like a man watching his entire understanding of reality collapse. "That is not possible," Richard finally managed. You are a poor black woman who married above her station?" Rachel finished the sentence he could not. "A gold digger who contributed nothing to your family? A charity case your son picked up out of misguided sympathy?" She reached into a folder and began laying documents on the table. "These are the financial records showing that Meridian Capital has provided over $200 million in investment and credit support to Whitmore Holdings over the past 5 years. Every development project you completed during that time, every acquisition, every expansion, all of it was made possible by capital that originated from this company. My company." She looked at Margaret directly. "The gala where you announced your new arts foundation? My money paid for the catering. The renovation of your summer house in the Hamptons? My money covered the overruns. The private school tuition for your grandchildren? Subsidized by profits that flowed through credit lines I approved." Margaret's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "You spent 3 years treating me like I was worthless," Rachel continued. "You searched my purse for stolen silverware. You hired investigators to find evidence that I was a fraud. You convinced your son to throw away his marriage because you believed I was beneath your family." She let the words settle before delivering the final truth. "And the entire time, your family's survival depended on me." Ethan spoke for the first time, his voice cracked and hollow. "Rachel, why did you never tell me?" She turned to face the man she had once loved more than anything in the world. He looked smaller now, diminished, nothing like the confident man who had approached her in a coffee shop years ago. "Because I wanted you to love me when I had nothing," she said. "I spent my whole life watching people change when they found out about my money. I wanted to know if real love was possible. Love that had nothing to do with what I could provide." Her voice softened slightly, and for a moment the boardroom disappeared and it was just the two of them. "You had me, Ethan. All of me. I would have given up everything, the company, the money, all of it, if you had just chosen me. But you did not choose me. You chose them." She gestured toward his family without looking at them. "You watched your mother humiliate me and you said nothing. You let them call me a thief and you signed those papers without a word. You had 3 years to decide what kind of man you wanted to be, and you decided to be a coward." Ethan's eyes were wet. "I made a mistake. I know that now. If I could go back—" "You cannot go back," Rachel interrupted. "None of us can. We can only move forward with the consequences of what we have done." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city she had quietly conquered while everyone underestimated her. "I am not going to destroy your family, Ethan. I am not going to bankrupt your parents or take your homes or leave you with nothing. That is not who I am." She turned back to face them all. "But I am also not going to save you. Meridian Capital is withdrawing all financial support from Whitmore Holdings, effective immediately. Every credit line will be closed. Every investment will be liquidated. Every partnership will be terminated." Richard lurched forward in his chair. "You cannot do this. We will sue. We will—" You will do nothing, Rachel said calmly. Your lawyers can review the contracts if they wish. Every action I am taking is fully within my legal rights. There is no lawsuit that will change that. She gathered her folder and walked toward the door. What happens next is up to you. You can find other investors, restructure your debt, sell your assets, whatever you need to do. But you will do it without my help. At the door, she stopped and looked back one final time. You looked at me and saw nothing. Remember that when you are trying to understand how you lost everything. The months that followed were exactly as Rachel had predicted. Whitmore Holdings declared bankruptcy before summer. Richard and Margaret were forced to sell their Manhattan townhouse, their Hamptons estate, and most of their art collection. Charlotte, who had never worked a day in her life, found herself facing a world that did not care about her last name or her social connections. Victoria Ashford ended her relationship with Ethan within a week of the Meridian meeting. It turned out she had been attracted to his family's wealth, not to him. Without the promise of inheritance, Ethan held no interest for her. Ethan himself was left with the hardest burden of all, the knowledge of what he had thrown away. He had divorced a woman he thought was ordinary, only to discover she was extraordinary. He had chosen his family's approval over his wife's love, and his family had led him straight into ruin. He had everything he thought he wanted, and he had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. 6 months after the meeting, Rachel walked into a small coffee shop in Brooklyn. It was the same shop where she had met Ethan years ago, with the same worn tables and the same quiet atmosphere. She ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and opened her laptop to review some documents. A young man at the next table glanced at her curiously, but said nothing. He did not recognize her. He had no idea that the woman in the simple sweater and jeans commanded one of the largest investment firms in America. That was exactly how Rachel wanted it. She thought about her mother, who had never lived to see her daughter's success. She thought about the girl she had been, poor, determined, desperate to prove that she was worth something. She thought about the woman she had become, wealthy beyond measure, respected by everyone who knew her true identity, and finally at peace. She had not needed the Whitmores to validate her worth. She had never needed anyone's approval but her own. The only mistake she had made was forgetting that for 3 years while she tried to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. That mistake was behind her now. Rachel looked out the window at the Brooklyn street, at the ordinary people living ordinary lives, and she smiled. She had built an empire. She had survived betrayal. She had faced the people who hurt her and walked away with her dignity intact. And now, finally, she was free. The world would always underestimate women who looked like her. That was not something she could change, but she had learned something valuable from the experience. Being underestimated was not a weakness. It was an advantage, and she intended to use it for the rest of her life. She finished her coffee, closed her laptop, and stepped back out into the city. The story was over. Her life was just beginning. So that's Rachel's story. A woman who proved that silence can be the most powerful weapon of all. Now I'm curious about you. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this one hit different for you, if you felt that satisfying moment when the truth finally came out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories like this coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's next. See you in the next one.